All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is Daily Vlog 2025, number 89. And today, remember how I said when I got the new camera, I'm like, you know what's real stupid about cameras? Is they can all tilt up, but they can never tilt down. This one can tilt down. And it only took me, like, what, a month to figure out. And it wasn't like there was a button to press or anything. No, you just had to go, stooped. So, yes, now you can see more of my bulbous, disgusting form. Congratulations. I needed to drink. Water is good for you. So, today, went through replying to the comments that I haven't been able to reply to for a little while. And I had a couple different comments that talked about kind of tips for running Giga games and stuff like that. And my response in general, when people ask me for like DMing advice, one of my kind of universal tips is do it. And it sounds like a cop out because it's like, well, I came to you asking for advice so I would know what I was doing before I did it. And you just said, well, just do it. I'm going to be no help to you whatsoever. You just have to go in completely blind. And that's not what the advice is. The reason that one of my first bits of advice to any potential DM or GM is you really need to just do it is to compare it to another one of my passions. I played saxophone for over 20 years. I theoretically could still do it. Like I have two saxophones. I've got a tenor and an alto sax. They're in the other part of the basement. And I also have my clarinet there too. If I wanted to, I could break them out. I could play. And I probably wouldn't be horrible at it. My armature is shot to shit, so probably wouldn't be able to play for super long. And I'd lose a little bit of my range and stuff like that. But I remember mostly how the instrument is supposed to play. And I did pick up my saxophone, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago to do an experiment for one of my science courses. And picking it back up and playing it, it really is like riding a bike. However, when I first started playing jazz, when I first started out in middle school, we would do soloing and stuff like that, and I became one of the kind of featured soloists of the band, which is a big band. Like my middle school jazz band, I think, because we ran, I think 5 saxes, 5 or 6 trumpets, 5 or 6 bones, a couple clarinets, a couple flutes, and then a full rhythm section. So we had a large, we had a very large jazz band, and even with our like 40 or 50 piece jazz band, I was one of the featured soloists. And back then, we would have like all of the pieces that we would play would have the solos written in. And so that's how I first learned how to solos. I'd bring my music up and I would play what was written. And it worked okay, but I didn't really understand how soloing worked in jazz. I just knew that there were some times where I got to stand up and play by myself, and then I got to go back to the band. And I really loved it. Then I got into high school, and there were no more pre-written solos. We were expected to improvise, which is what you do in jazz. And I worked with the jazz band director, and I was basically you just have to do it. And it was really frustrating to me. It's like, no, I don't want to stand up in front of a bunch of people that I don't know super well, because I got into the jazz band as a freshman. And so I had, and the jazz band was audition only. It was mostly upperclassmen. And so I felt very intimidated by that. So I don't want to like stand up, and they're so good at it, and I'm so bad at this, and I don't know. And it always used to frustrate me that the response was, you just need to do it. And so for a few years, I would force myself to get up there, and I never really felt like I was learning anything, because I was always trying to make sure I wasn't making a mistake, or I wasn't playing the wrong note or something like that. And fun fact, there are no wrong notes in jazz. Some just sound better than others. But you can play purely chromatic scales and things like that in jazz and make them sound amazing. It all depends on what emphases you put in and understanding where the key changes come in and stuff like that. Like, it's one of my favorite things about jazz is there aren't any wrong notes. And even if you do play a quote unquote wrong note, if you commit to it, people will think you're playing the right note. I love jazz. It's amazing. So my junior year of high school, for 8th period, it was the first time, because freshman and sophomore year, both semesters, I had a full course load. I did not have a study hall at all. And so finally, my junior year of high school, I finally had a study hall during 8th period, which is the final period before we left. And for the first couple weeks, I would go to study hall, and I don't know if this is how it is at every single school, but at my school, study hall sucked. Just massively, horribly sucked. We would go into a room in the middle of the school. So it wasn't like there was like windows where you could look out. No, this is a completely like landlocked room in the center of the core courses wing of the school. So there's no windows. It's just a cement box that they put us in, with a teacher that, to this day, I assume he like ran over the principal's dog or something, and his punishment was that he had to supervise study hall. He despised being there. Like, you could feel the waves of hate flowing off of him. And so when we would get in there, he'd do this thing like, all right, no talking, only working on homework, blah, 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 blah. And then he'd sit at the desk, and I have no idea what he did for that hour. But he never looked up unless someone was doing something that he didn't like. And then he'd be like, hey, don't be doing that. And I hated it. It was the most boring thing in the world. Because first of all, I didn't like doing homework. I learned very, very quickly, and homework bored me to death, because generally I would master whatever the homework was supposed to teach you long before the homework was done. And it would bore the hell out of me. So I got this bright idea one day, and I can't remember why I thought this, but I'm just like, you know what, can I just go down to the band room? I think it was something like I needed to practice something for marching band or something. And so I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. Good tip. Most teachers are terrified of the band room, because it's a very, very large room full of significantly more students than they've ever had in any of their classrooms. And all of them have very, very loud noise-making machines. So most teachers won't touch you if you go anywhere near the band room. I learned this in middle school, by the way. Anytime I need to get out of trouble, it's like, oh, I gotta go to the band room. So I go down there. And the only thing I have to do is I have to sign in at the band room. Well, all the band directors love me. I've been a section leader since I think my freshman year, and I've been in jazz band and marching band and pep band, and I did everything. So the band directors loved me. They had no problem with me coming down. I used to write music as well. Like I wrote two movements of a symphony. I wrote a sonata and a waltz for movements 1 and movements 3. I had plans to write movements 2 and 4. I just never did. So it was really well liked. I came down there, and 2 of the upper classmen were there as well. And I'd known them since my freshman year of high school. They were only a year older than me, and we'd been in jazz band together and marching band, everything. One of them was actually one of our drum majors. The other one was just someone who's really, really good. And so I'd known them for a really, really long time. We'd been in jazz together for a really, really long time. One of them played alto sax. The other one played trombone. And so I come in, and they have an independent study, and their independent study is in improvisational jazz. And so what they did is they bought a book, and you can still find these. Like, you walk into any like White House of Music. Thank you, phone. Walk into any like White House of Music or any kind of music store, and you will find these like weird shelving units where you find these real thin books with like super high gloss covers, and they will have a bunch of different sheet music, and they're generally arranged for, you know, a single instrument, and they'll come with a CD, and they're basically for kids to kind of learn stuff. And sometimes they'll be like popular music, like you can play "My Heart Will Go On" from Titanic. And I'm kind of dating myself with how long ago I was in high school. But they had this one where it was just kind of jazz standards, and it came with a CD. And in the middle of each one of these things, basically how every single one of these songs worked was you'd have the head. Basically, you'd play through the melody, and then it would open up. And the head itself was generally no more than about anywhere between like 16 and 32 bars. And then it would open up a solo section where on the CD, the rhythm section and background would just keep on going. You could just solo on top of it, and then it'd go back to the head at the end. And so what they would do is I think there was only like 11 or 12 songs in this book. And so what they did for literally an entire semester was they would put this CD in, and then they would just play through the same songs over and over and over and over and over again, trying new things and messing around with the different key changes and stuff like that, and just learning how to do improvisational jazz. Well, I was down there, and we were friends. They go, "Hey, Jody, why don't you get your sax out, and why don't you join us?" And I was still very terrified of looking like a fool in front of the upperclassmen, but I knew these guys pretty well. So I did, and that was when I learned how to improvise. And it wasn't so much that I learned the right notes, or I learned the correct way to pick out the right scale that will fit in any particular thing. That is all stuff that I'd learned years before. What it was I learned my particular style. And one of the big reasons that I learned my particular style is the other 2 students had their own very, very unique style. The dude, and I generally will not use any names because I never want to like call somebody out, and for whatever reason, you know, maybe remind them of something they'd rather forget or something like that. So it'll just be the sax player and the bone player. So the sax player, he was exceptionally good at articulation in general. One of the kind of unique things about woodwind instruments in general, the way that they make sound, specifically with a saxophone, but it's almost every woodwind instrument, is you have a reed. It's a piece of reed. It looks like bamboo, and you put it on the mouthpiece, and there's a little gap between the reed itself and the rest of the mouthpiece. When you blow in it, the reed vibrates, and that's what makes the sound. And in order to get articulation, basically when the notes stop, and the kind of rhythm, normally what you do is you touch the tip of your tongue to the reed. And by just touching it, it stops it from vibrating for a moment. And that's how most people play a woodwind instrument. But it does mean that you're technically limited as to how fast you can articulate something on a woodwind instrument, because you have to stop the reed from moving and then start it vibrating again. And so you're limited by your tongue dexterity. Ladies, woodwind players have very agile tongues. On a brass instrument like the trombone, the way it works, you have this mouthpiece that you put to your lips and you purse them. You just go. That's what you do, and you buzz your lips, and that's what makes the sound. Well, because your lips are buzzing in front of your teeth, you can't actually stop them with your tongue. And so the way that brass players are able to articulate is they actually stop the airflow. And they generally do that by touching their tongue to the roof of their mouth. So they go ta, ta. And so by just touching it to the roof of your mouth, it stops it for a brief second and then starts it again. Because brass articulation and woodwind articulation are different, there's different ways to do it. And one of the things that brass players learn how to do is a technique called double or triple tonguing. It sounds dirty. It kind of is. And so what it is if they need to articulate really, really quickly, which does happen on things like the what's it called? The Imperial March from Star Wars, the dun dun diddle dun diddle diddle dun 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 diddle dun diddle diddle dun. Because it's all the same note, they can't just move the. So what they have to do is they have to go ta ta ticketa ta ticketa ticketa ta, and so that's triple tonguing. As it goes titika titika titika, or ticketa. Is a little bit more common, where they stop the air with the tip of their front, that's the t, and then they stop it with the back of their tongue, which is that ka, and then they stop it again with the front of their tongue, t. But it's all done with the roof of their mouth, so titika or ticketa, 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 ticketa. And that means brass players in general can articulate significantly faster than woodwind players. However, woodwind players have a lot more buttons that they can play with. And so generally, for woodwind players, they can do these crazy, intense runs and stuff like that because they have significantly more buttons that they can play with. Whereas brass players, they can articulate significantly faster, but in order to play all the different notes, they have to change the partials that they're playing in. It's more complicated than I want to get into here. The sax player had figured out how to do double and triple tonguing on a saxophone, which is not how it's supposed to work. And so when he would improvise, he would do these crazy, really intricate, articulate runs. And you go, and he'd just be crazy stuff like that. The bone player was just really laid back, and so he would, he did a lot of glissandos, which are like slides with the bone, where you go and do that. And so they learned how they liked to improvise, and I started learning how I like to improvise. My personal style, I love doing a lot of bends, and I bend notes like crazy and stuff like that, which is something that most woodwind players can do a little bit, but I would go pretty extreme. Like I could bend, depending on the note, I could bend a full half step, sometimes a full step below the note. Just go and do these scoops and over things. And I learned what it was for me to improvise, because everybody has their own style and everybody has their own thing that feels good to them. And to bring it back to the discussion we were having before, 20 minutes later, the same thing is true about being a game master. I can give you lots of tips about what I do, and I can give you lots of tips about what other people do as well. I have actually studied game mastering. In addition to kind of teaching myself and learning my own style, I've studied other people and I've listened to podcasts and read articles and all these different things. I've read book upon book upon book upon book upon book upon book upon book. I've done a lot of study. I understand a lot of different ways to run games. I know a lot of different ways to prep. But none of that is going to be useful to you if it doesn't gel with your personal style. If I had focused on copying the sax player's style, first of all, I still can't double and triple tongue on my saxophone. It is an extremely difficult thing to do. So if I had fixated on learning how to double into the triple tongue, the other thing that I really like to do is a thing called altissimo, which is basically saxophone has an upper limit. It can go up to what is it? We got C, D, E. It can go up to an F above the treble clef. That's officially how high it can go. But if you mess with your armature and do some weird fingerings and stuff like that, you can get these super high, kind of almost like screech tones out of it. And for someone that's not very good at it, that's exactly what it sounds like. It sounds like the instrument is kind of like screeching. But someone that's really, really skilled at it can actually hit specific notes, and it just sounds really, really cool. And they can play super, super high. Brass players technically don't have that the same limitation because, again, everything is based off of their armature and how they hold their their mouth and their cheeks and everything like that. And there's a particular style of trumpet playing specifically called screech trumpet, which is where they just play these crazy, crazy high, like in the rafters notes. Anyway, so if I had fixated on, well, he was someone that I admire. He's someone I still admire. He's a really amazing dude. I believe he went in the military for a while. I have no idea what he does now because we haven't spoken in years. But I still really admire the guy. And I admired him then. And so if I had focused on learning his particular style of improvisation, I would not have become a good improviser because that's just not my style. That's not how I improvise. And in general, the most important thing for a good solo in jazz is for you to feel it. Like, you really have to get into the groove and you've got to feel what you're doing. And it translated to when I started doing vocal jazz and the things like that, where I started doing scat singing and stuff like that. Like, I took all the techniques that I learned as an instrumentalist and I applied them to my voice. Like, I still bend notes when I sing. It's significantly easier to bend notes when you're singing than it is on a saxophone. I'm going to just put that out there. And I still use, like, a lot of the solos that I do vocally are very similar to solos I used to do when I was on my instrument. And if I'd fixated on that, or if I'd fixated on the bone players, kind of glissandos and stuff like that, doing a glissando on anything other than a trombone is significantly more difficult because you can't actually go. You actually have to do a chromatic scale where it goes. And it's possible to do, and you can make it sound somewhat smooth, but you can't make it sound like a trombone. That's a unique aspect to having the slide that they use. And so none of that would have been helpful to me. And I play so differently than either the sax player or the bone player that me fixating on what they do or what they did would have just been a really big waste of time. And I did for a little while. And then, because they were both really, really supportive, they just started encouraging me, yeah, go for it. Just do something. It's your turn. Do it. Go for it. Do whatever you want. And it absolutely changed my life. Because that was fall semester. For spring semester, I still had a study hall, but they didn't. They had to graduate. But for spring semester, we formed a jazz combo, and we would rehearse. I can't remember what it was. It was like Monday nights or Tuesday nights or something like that. We would rehearse after school, and it was phenomenally amazing because we got to sit there. We got to pick our own music. We got to arrange our own music and stuff like that. You would just pick random songs and go, "Hey, you play this part. You play this part. I'll play this part." It was some of the greatest music education that I've ever gotten. And there was no teacher involved whatsoever, other than the band director coming in every so often, going, "Hey, try this." The first time I ever sang jazz was because of that combo. Because the band director came in, "Hey guys, you know that Jody can sing, right?" And they go, "Yeah." I said, "Well, why don't you have him sing this part?" It was also how I learned I had perfect pitch. Because we sang Summertime, or we played Summertime. And so what we did is we started off all playing, and then everybody dropped out, even the rhythm section. Everybody dropped out, and I went up to the mic and I started singing. And I would improvise on it and do a lot of different stuff, but I sang completely a cappella. There was drum fills every so often. But I sang for like a minute or so, completely a cappella. And when the band came back in, I wasn't like one of the difficult things about singing without any sort of accompaniment whatsoever is it's very easy to kind of lose the pitch. And even really skilled vocalists can, if they don't quite hit the interval correctly or something like that, you can eventually start to kind of lose the pitch. Not so much that you'd be in a completely different key or something like that, but enough that if someone started playing while you were singing, you would notice that you'd be kind of out of tune. When the instruments came back in, I sustained a note, and then they started playing with me, and I was perfectly in tune. I wasn't close. I wasn't, good enough. I was absolutely 100% perfectly in tune, which is extremely difficult to do, especially as a high school student. So anyway, getting back to GMing. I can tell you a lot of different techniques for what you want to do. I can tell you how to set up your prep time. I can talk to you about monster choice or map making or how to prep NPCs, and none of that is going to be particularly useful for you if that's not your particular style. The most important thing in becoming a good GM is figuring out what your style is. And the only way that you do that is by running games. And I know how terrifying it is to sit down your first time and you see people that are all looking to you to be the person that knows what they're doing, and just feeling this intense feeling of imposter syndrome. And like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And this was a big mistake. And how could I be this stupid? But if you can get past that, that's where you're going to learn what it is that you do well. And the only way you're going to learn it is not by copying another dungeon master. It's not by reading a book and doing what the book tells you. It's by doing it and trying different things and expecting things to not work. GMing is a lot like jazz. There are no wrong notes. There's just some that sound better than others. And sometimes you want a bad sounding note. You want to create dissonance, because the entirety of music in general, if you look at the history of music, the entire time it has existed, music is about tension and release, dissonance and harmony. So you have to create dissonance to resolve it into harmony. The same thing is true about storytelling. Storytelling is about conflict and resolution. Conflict and resolution. Sometimes the conflict is something that's happening in the game. Sometimes the conflict is something that's or something that's happening in the story. Sometimes the conflict is something that's happening in the game. Sometimes the conflict is something that's happening between the players and the GM. But it's all about conflict and resolution. And so doing something wrong is going to create conflict. and then you're going to have to figure out how to resolve it. And that's going to continue making stories. And those are the things that are going to be the most interesting. You want to know the things that I remember the most from when I used to run games? They're not when things went well. The things that I remember the most from my convention years, from the years that I ran D&D programs in friendly local game stores, are the times that things went wrong. One of my favorite stories ever, it didn't happen to me, it happened to the table next to me. But what happened is they got to the end of this pre-written adventure. And basically what happens at the end of this adventure, you get down to this kind of subterranean room. And the room itself is this really cool boss fight where you can push this crystal and it basically removes gravity's effect on a couple different statues. And then there's a puzzle where you have to move the statues around and then turn off and on this gravity thing so you can move them when you want. It's a really cool thing. And at the very end, there's a big stone set of double doors that you open up to get out. The doors themselves require you to pull. It says very clearly in the adventure, pull. They pull open, they open inward. The players went up and said, okay, so we push the door open. And the GM, just thinking it would be funny, goes, yeah, nothing happens. Now, again, to open this door, you have to solve the puzzle in there. And they'd solved the puzzle, and they'd gotten the kind of notification, hey, you solved the puzzle. You heard, the click sound, and the door is unlocked. Then they went up to it, and they pushed. They couldn't do it. That table spent an hour trying to figure out how to open this door. They tried pushing on it. They tried digging under it. They tried breaking the door down. An actual hour of game time. And I'm running a game right next to them. And at certain points, I just had to stop the game I was running. Guys, you gotta just listen for me. And yeah, it took them over an hour for one of the players to go, did we ever try pulling? And they pulled the door open. And that's what it was. Was that the exact right thing to do? I mean, it's obvious they had already solved the actual puzzle that unlocked the door. So when they went over and just said, "Hey, I'm gonna open the door," just because they said push, the GM didn't have to interpret it as well, they're pushing against it. He could have just said, "Well, it doesn't open when you push, but then you instantly try pulling, and it works fine." But he didn't, because that wasn't really his style. And at any point in that entire hour, he could have said something like, someone roll a perception check. And they go, okay. They go, okay, you look at the hinges that are on this side of the door. And they go, what does that mean? Well, look at the door over there. What side of the door are the hinges on? Are they on this side or are they on the other side? Well, they're on this side. And how do you open that door? Well, you pull. Oh, there's a billion different ways you could have told them, guys, just pull. Just pull. That's all you got to do is you got to pull. But he didn't, because that wasn't his style. And it was amazing. Those are the things that I remember. Other things like storming a monastery to try and get someone out of a cult, and having an argument completely silent because we cast a silence spell, and so the DM wouldn't allow us to speak to each other. Like the players were not allowed to speak. We had to motion into the things like that, and that took us 20 minutes to get through a door that was unlocked. Like, it was hilarious. Those are the things I remember, and they weren't things that were like, oh, this is all the... It was just something that the GM did because that was their particular style. So, if you're interested in becoming a good GM, the absolute best thing in the world that you can do is to run games. And understand, the first time that you run, it's going to feel weird. It's going to be rough. You're going to get things wrong. That's not a bad thing. Again, getting things wrong is fun. We had this one time we were doing the Scales of War adventure path in 4th edition. And there was, and this I understand now that this is a cancelable offense. I 100% understand after telling this story, everyone's going to hate me because it's a purely deplorable thing that I have done. Okay. I've admitted that. I'm willing to accept the punishment. Part of the adventure path, you have to go to a guild hall for retired paladins. That's what they are. They are retired paladins. The GM did not speak particularly clearly, and we didn't hear retired. We heard, and I realize this is a very offensive term nowadays. I'm not a big fan of the term, but I need to use it in order for you all to understand the story. We heard retarded, and the GM went with it. This was the special paladin house, and again, I understand now it was in bad taste, but I will remember that gaming session for the rest of my life. I will never forget the time that we went to the special paladin house and had them help us figure out how to get to the Shadowfell. Because that's why we had to go there. Is we had to talk to these paladins and figure out a way to enter the Shadowfell. So that's what being a good GM is. It's not getting the rules right. It's getting them wrong and continuing. It's not about doing all the prep work the way it's supposed to be done. It's reacting when you didn't plan for this. That's what being a GM is. And different people do it different ways. Everybody's solo is unique. Every time you stand up to take your solo in jazz, something different is going to come out of your horn. Even if you've played that song 1,000,000 times, something different is going to come out. That's the purpose. However, you can tell a solo by Stan Getz compared to a solo by John Coltrane. You can tell the difference. You can technically tell a difference between early Coltrane and late Coltrane. And that's a whole other debate about early Coltrane. He was hooked on a lot of real bad stuff, and then he went clean. And so later Coltrane had a very different feeling to the stuff, and a lot of people argue that he wasn't as good. It's a whole thing in jazz. Same thing is true about game mastering or dungeon mastering. Different people are going to have different things that they do. You have your own style. Every single person that is a game master has their own unique style. It may sound strange because there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of dungeon masters out there and game masters out there. And how can there be that many different styles? Well, because there are billions of people in the world and no two of them are the same. Everybody has their own experiences. Everybody has their own things that they do. And the absolute best thing you can do for yourself if you want to be a truly skilled game master is to find out what your style is and lean into it. You may be a very, very prep heavy DM. You may be a very, very improvisational DM. You may enjoy doing lots of funny voices. You may enjoy not doing any voices at all. You may really enjoy designing clever combat encounters. You may only do combat encounters once every 6 or 7 sessions. But you do you. And while yes, it's nice to get advice from other dungeon masters, especially if you're worried about starting, having some sort of structure to help you figure out where to go is nice. Again, I learned improvisational jazz not by just sitting there and playing random notes to nothing. No, I had pre-written songs with pre-written solo sections that had example solos that I could listen to. I had some structure, and then I went further. So yeah, you can start by looking for advice and stuff like that, but the absolute best thing that you can do is try doing it. I like to start with a new GM. I like to start them off by having them run a pre-written adventure. It is significantly easier. It gives them plenty of structure to kind of cling to, but it gives them enough space for them to start figuring out what is their particular game mastering style. And I have trained dozens of game masters over the years. And I've inspired even more people to start running their own games. I have a couple people specifically that have called me out saying the reason that I run games now is because Jody got me started on this. So trust me when I say I'm pretty good at getting people started. And my advice is always give this a try. It's one of the reasons I like the early Adventures League stuff, because it gives you everything that you need to run. And I'll just go, hey, read this. It will give you all the stuff that you need. Look over the rule book and then do it. After you've got a few games under your belt, then we can start talking about, technique and things like that. And we can start kind of refining what your particular style. But you really need to do it. The same thing is true about Essence 20, Fabula Ultima, Lancer, whatever you want. You have to do it. You just have to sit down and do it. And different systems might bring out different aspects of your GMing. I run, like Lancer, I ran very, very differently than I run my D&D games. I run it very, very differently than Open Legend or the Cypher system or anything like that. There's still kind of a through, thread that's all my dungeon mastering style, but each system's a little bit different. So anyway, thought this would be an interesting topic to talk about. And I moved my camera so you can see more of my disgusting body. Interested to hear from you guys. What do you guys think? Especially if you are an experienced game master. Let me know what you think of this advice. And if you are a new game master, and I know there's a few of you guys out there, let me know what you think of the advice. Again, it sounds counterproductive. It sounds like a cop-out. It's not. It really isn't. The best thing that you can do is learn what your GMing style is. And the only way that you do that is by GMing. Once you've done it a few times and you start realizing these are the things I like, these are the things I don't like, then you can start getting into the nitty gritty of, oh, well, this DM does this and this DM does this, and start figuring out what things are going to be most helpful for you. But you really need to start from a base of, this is my style. Anyway, it's going to be all for me today. I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.